Good morning, everyone. It is my delight and pleasure to welcome you to this uh, conversation that I have been looking forward to for a while as we mark 3 years as a formal organization. I'd like to start with a short film before we speak about Caregiver Saathi. Can we play the film, please?
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
What do I say about myself?
What did you do to take care of yourself
Take care of myself.
emotionally?
To be honest, nothing.
There was a period when I had gone to the doctor and he said, "You're clinically exhausted."
You don't know which way you're heading. You don't know where to start or where to finish.
I can't trust anybody else with my husband. I want to do it on my own.
Focus on giving the level of comfort, giving the right treatment, supervising the treatment. You got to become a counselor sometimes. Sometimes you got to scold them like a parent. Sometimes you got to be really loving and caring.
There used to be a time when I just slapped my husband, said, "What are you doing? Come on, try to understand."
At the end of the day, if anything happens, then I have to step in. So that responsibility and that onus does lie with me.
They put their life comes to a standstill.
It becomes literally like a role reversal.
You have to really recondition your mind to not feel guilty and to
And make you realize that this is a part and parcel of life, and that doesn't mean that you have to bring your life to a standstill.
so why did I do this for myself, or why am I watching so much of Netflix? I feel I deserve it.
If I could find little time to sit down and paint, that would give me a lot of energy and happiness.
It's about being a doctor, being a nurse, being an oncologist, or being in palliative care, and one would take a lot of pride that saying that well, I've set up this facility on palliative care. That would be a matter of pride. But in one's own personal life, caregiving is pretty much a very thankless job.
I'm going to let that sink in. And family caregivers are the invisible shoulders on which our healthcare system rests. Every home has a caregiver. Caregivers tend to be invisible, unrecognized, underappreciated, and underserved. So much so that caregivers themselves don't think of themselves and are unlikely to invest time or money on themselves. We also know simultaneously that unpaid care related work is predominantly a women and girls job, and it holds women and girls back from opportunities of education, employment, entrepreneurship, financial independence, and so on and so forth. In a country like India, where caregiving is a socio-culturally driven idea, impacted by gender stereotypes, and mental health is a taboo. We ventured out many years ago, and personally, in my mind, I haven't been able to define what was the time at which I started. Today is the day that we got the formal entity as an organization. So, this is as good as any other day to mark a celebration. I'm here with some people who have been my mentors, my guides, my friends, people who have patiently, kindly listened to my vague ideas or my hopes and desires. but have patiently and kindly walked this path with me over the last 3 years. I'm going to introduce them to you one by one, and we are going to have a conversation about what the last 3 years have been. Um, I'd like to welcome Nareen. Hi, Nareen.
Hi there. Morning to you.
Nareen is an organization consultant and has been someone who has known me for many, many years. He works with organizations in the corporate world as well as in the social sector in the areas of development, change, and transformation. Naren has been a caregiver himself and relates with the idea. I have deep respect for the quality of his writing, insights, and wit. Thank you for being here today and over the last 3 years, Naren.
Thank you.
I also have here Mustafa Muchala.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Mustafa is a super, super, super senior from my alma mater and uh, a friend, more than that, a guide who has extensive, deep experience in social entrepreneurship and has held my hand in many, many dark moments of this journey. Mustafa has been kind and has helped guide Caregiver Saathi through some of the complex challenges that we wanted to navigate. Thank you for being here. And the next that I have is Roop. Roop again has
Hi.
been
Hi,
someone
Bhavna. Hi, everybody.
Roop has been someone again that I met during my journey at Sumedha's, also like Naren and Mustafa, a friend, someone who I have relied on for advice on many things, and especially Caregiver Saathi. Well, I have looked up to him for his experience of working with organizations and especially the social development sector, holding two organizations at the same time. And sometimes our conversations run into deep philosophical, ambiguous terrain. And I am ever so grateful for the perspective that he has provided over the time.
Thanks, Bhavna. The feeling's mutual.
And we have Dr. Rajam Iyer.
Good morning. I can
Dr.
feel
Rajam Iyer.
Bhavna has a pregnant pause after my name, so I suppose she's thinking of what to tell about me.
Okay, so that's an example of our relationship, right? See, Dr. Raja Iyer is someone who enjoys pulling my leg, but has been this person that I got to know through the palliative care network, and has become this trusting, reliable friend who has not just guided me but Caregiver Saathi through many, many challenges in the world of healthcare and medicine that I seem to have entered from the back door, but have needed someone to, give us inputs from time to time. I think we are experiencing a small technical glitch, and Gaurav Suri has not yet been able to join, but I suppose he will join soon. And he is the other person who will be there in this conversation. Uh, in addition to Gaurav being a friend and a life partner, he has certainly borne the brunt of this idea taking shape over many, many years. And I would like to acknowledge each one of you for walking this path with me so far and helping the team and everyone else see how you have seen the organization, us from your point of view, now that we stand at this milestone.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start with you, Naren.
Okay. Tell me, what would you like me to talk about?
What has been your journey and experience of the idea of Caregiver Saathi? And how have you seen it take shape over these years?
Uh, when I look back, I think, in my understanding, as I want to see Caregiver Saathi develop and grow, I'll trace it back all the way to the point where I think you started a page on multiple sclerosis on Facebook. And I
Yes.
think somewhere at that point in time, I thought there was here somebody who wanted to do something about an affliction that is often not understood, not talked about, and yet many suffer. And I think there was a personal connect to the uh, medical condition. I think in the family that I recall, I think perhaps with your father, and I think you try to set off, you know, a messaging to the world at large about what this condition is, and you know, I at that time I thought perhaps you were also looking to build a kind of a community of people who were familiar with this condition or were suffering this condition and so on. And to me, I traced back the genesis of Caregiver Saathi to I think that point and that initiative, and I think that soon developed, as I saw it, into an idea of reaching out to a larger community, a much wider population of caregivers. And I think from there the idea developed as I saw it, because there was almost an immediate understanding that every family had a caregiver at some point in time, or a caregiver who was dealing with multiple people who were recipients of care. And when I look back, I think way back perhaps in 2016, I recall a first kind of a draft of what Caregiver Saathi is, what it aims to do, who it seeks to sort of reach out to, and what difference does it seek to make. So it seemed like an idea that was brewing for some years, even before it was formally registered as an organization. And I think from the very early days, it is something that you have powered through your own personal energy, very palpable, very visible, and available in abundance in every interaction. And you sort of built this idea upon idea upon idea. And as we know, looking back in my mind, it just took shape, took form, grew in size, reached out to a much, much wider audience, a much wider group of supporters, of people who understood what you were trying to do, or at least were curious about what you're trying to do. So I think this has largely been how I've seen the idea of Caregiver Saathi from the time it seemed like it had germinated to where it is today. Very much a force in making this idea of a caregiver and the world of the caregiver become much more accessible to everybody.
Thank you. I'm glad you remember that page from Facebook, which was actually really the first attempt. And I have, relied on you for a perspective sometimes in getting lost with the idea and, getting a different point of view to focus on. I would like to bring in Mustafa and get his point of view about what the journey has been for him.
Thanks, Bhavna. I'm also checking to see if my voice is audible.
Yes, we are
All
good.
right. As I look back, Bhavna, at what you have started and what you have done to get people together, it describes to me the steps that a good social entrepreneurship journey takes. So I want to just talk about many of the things I've seen you do and Caregiver Saathi as an organization do, and describe the steps that they seem to be formed in. I think you've looked at what I call a big wicked problem in the world. It's a problem that's not going to go away. It's a problem that has seeked attention from people, from citizens, from the government. It's a fairly also an invisible problem, so it's never seen clearly, that of the condition of caregivers and the need for caregivers. So it's a you've taken a look at that big problem. It's worldwide, and you started in a specific area in some places which are visible to you. Typical of big wicked problems, there is no money available. And I know that you have started this journey, and in fact, over the last 3 years, you've done it in a very bootstrapped way. I will not be surprised if you've put in a lot of your personal funds. Of course, you've put in all your personal time and attention. But to get this going, to get volunteers, to get people to join you and do the effort, I think I admire the way that you've bootstrapped this entire effort and not allowed it to lag because money has not been easily available. And I think you've been able to do that because you've personalized it. There's a call from the inside that seems to be very clearly heard by you, and you have extended that into the world. One of the things I've seen you do very well, Bhavna, is explore the many facets of caregiving. And I think the way that you have looked at it and even sectioned it uh, has allowed the large piece to be clear to many of us who are sort of with you in the journey but not active participants in a sense. Each time we speak, Bhavna, there's a new facet that you have added to this entire arena. And it fascinates me how you're constantly able to see something new. And it's not just seeing something new, but I've always seen you take this new and try it out on the ground. Um, and hence the vision of what it can be, what it should be. I have seen that it moves, it expands, it reformulates. I'm really seeing that there is no sense of a clarity of vision and mission in terms of a statement. And I'm actually very pleased to see that, because as soon as you write things down and stick it on and tell people this is what it is, you tend to limit the possibility. For example, during the COVID period last year, the amount of work that Caregiver Saathi did in building a network, which I don't think was the intent of the Caregiver Saathi idea originally, that work was spectacular. I mean, the number of people you got networked and how they found hospitals and medicines for people whom they did not know, you did not know, but people reached out. And it just allowed you from this arena of caregiver to reach out to many people. So I really like this entire thing of go where you see there is a need in that larger arena. So I'm how can I say this? I'm basking in the glory of where Caregiver Saathi has reached in 3 years. I have played really no part with it, in it, except to be part of some phone calls with you. So, thank you.
Yeah, well, I will get my time to tell you all the ways in which you have been a part of this. Thank you for this, and I would now like to invite Roop, um, and how Roop, you have seen this idea take shape and you have participated in it.
Okay, but before I begin to start, I have to just keep the dog out of the room. 1 second.
That is a caregiving
Sorry.
task. I have to say. Thank you.
Uh, so I think uh, I think one of the first things I think Caregiver Saathi did for me, and I see that you've done it with many other people, is about asking the fundamental questions around caregiving, which I thought, when I saw some of the films that you made initially, it was quite a first time. In fact, that's a film that you started with, a little snippet from that. Hey, is it possible to see you, Bhavna? Because, otherwise I feel like I'm talking to myself. It feels very weird.
Certainly.
um, and as I was listening to people, and certainly for me, when your colleague Raj came and asked me those questions, and I think I must have spoken for some an hour or something, and recalling memories of caregiving that I have seen in my family, my grandmother, my mother, etc., etc. And that was quite evoking, and sort of triggered certain things. I've seen in earlier organizations that I've worked, I've seen programs being done, caring for caregivers, etc., but it was in a very NGOized social sector, underprivileged, social worker, that sort of a thing. But to actually throw it open to across classes and talking to people in the socio-economically privileged sections, it's make one assumes that if you've got money and if you've got a certain social capital, then you're not one of those needy people who need help. Help is always for the slums and people in socio-economically disadvantaged communities, which is, I mean, there's no debating on that. It's for sure. But I think when you did those initial interviews and films, it really threw open, even for me, in terms of how stoic caregivers become, and how difficult it is to actually answer this question that, what has it really done to me, for me, and so on and so forth. So I think asking questions, which I always think is the best thing an organization can do for social change, particularly on any issue that is so, there's so much of taking for granted, apathy around it, that, of course, if uh, somebody's ill in your family, or somebody's needs care, you're supposed to do it. I mean, what's the big deal? So I think that was the first thing I think Caregiver Saathi did, which I thought was wonderful. And in these 3 years, I think you barely started and COVID started almost at the same time. Um, I thought the way you navigated during these last couple of years, given the restrictions, given the almost unreal times that we are living in for an organization, I'm sure there's a lot of mobility is restricted. People suddenly, I'm sure you and your team yourself was distressed by COVID, and now who takes care of you? Um, and and running an organization, a startup in the, I know recently one keeps on hearing about how startups are the backbone of the Indian economy. I haven't seen too much of help coming from the governments to startups. I don't think Caregiver Saathi has certainly been any of the recipients of that. But it's been a very, very challenging time, I think, for most social organizations. And that takes me to many of our conversations I remember you having, that saying that you're talking about the identity of the organization. Is it a profit making organization? Is it a non profit making organization? What's the revenue stream? Because in the social sector, if you have to take a program like this, then you have to sort of justify it by the, a certain, reaching out a certain socioeconomic class. Otherwise, if you say that, well, I'm working with a sort of privileged groups, then it somehow does not justify. And then if you take it to CSR or corporates, then it has to be a different sort of a language. Or if you try to convert it into a profit-making organization, then it's a completely new, different ball game. So I think you've struggled with that quite a bit, and many of our conversations, which has been quite stimulating for me and thought provoking for me as well. So that was the other key point that I thought, um, as an organization you worked. It also set me thinking that is Caregiver Saathi, or the issue, for example, Mustafa talked about having, vision, mission, and so on and so forth. But I've always wondered, and many of your collaterals I have seen talks about numbers in quite a big way. We've reached 30,000 people, or we've reached 50,000 people. And it's always made me question that is the organization targeting numbers, and is the organization targeting change in a certain way? So for example, my vision for Caregiver Saathi, it's that 3 years down the line, that when you have started talking about caregiving, it does not provoke the surprise and the silence that
Yeah,
around the issue, and that has to be quantified very differently rather than looking at numbers.
that's
But
right.
it's been something I understand as a member, as a leader of an organization, looking at pragmatics. I mean, the world is conditioned to measure an organization by numbers of people that you have benefited. But it's also left me wondering that
Yeah.
isn't that a very restricted way of understanding Caregiver Sathi's impact in a particular way? So yeah, and I can go on. In these 3 years, has been, um, I think we've had conversations around your relationship with the organization, in terms of how you see it as whether it's a parent-child relationship, whether it's somebody, a founder is somebody who gives birth to an idea, and then as the team grows, things happen. Sometimes even the founders may not agree with. So it's as on issues of leadership and organizational building. I think we've had several conversations, which I thought was quite innovative. You're somebody, I think, I always cherish my conversations with you, and so Caregiver Saathi triggers sometimes curiosity, sometimes a little suspicion. What is it up to? Sometimes excitement, and but most of it very, very evoking and touching.
Thank you for that. I think in listening to each one of you, Naren, Mustafa, and now Roop, certainly I feel that I am looking at this journey slightly differently myself, and that's very useful. So thank you for that, Roop. I would like to bring in Dr. Rajam now, and have you.
Hi.
So Rajam, tell me about your association with Caregiver Saathi and what you have seen over this period.
So I think I remember my first meeting with you was the walk we did for palliative care on the World Palliative Care and Hospice Day. And it actually surprised me a lot that though palliative care was meant for patients and their family, there wasn't any official organization looking after caregivers. And which is the reason I think I took that little bit of an extra interest to introduce you to all the right people, which I think you constantly remind me, how I was generous enough to introduce you. But I think it was also vested interest because, as you know, I've been a caregiver both professionally as a doctor and personally at home. And it was interesting to realize that only after I got into palliative care, it was important to focus on the mental, physical, emotional health of a caregiver. And here was this lady who was happy to actually listen to me. Even if she didn't have solutions to all the problems that I had, there was somebody who actually agreed with all the issues I was going through. And I think that's half the battle won for caregivers. And like the initial earlier speakers said, Caregiver Saathi was 1 year into its origin, and bang came the pandemic. And I think that's when the heightened need for support for caregivers became even more obvious. For example, the fact that you had less help at home, you were interacting less with other people of your age group, you were not going out of the house for your breaks and your mental clarity or exercise or even entertainment. So everything came out together, and I really think it made a big difference to have somebody like you, Bhavna, and your organizations. And like Roop said, very interestingly, we always thought that it was for, I mean, it's the lower socioeconomic people who probably needed more support. But I think caregiving is not easy across socioeconomic, and I don't think it really makes a difference about your education or your bank balance. It is the equation and the emotion you have with the person you have to care give, and the unending responsibility. that can get really, really exhausting. And I must say that, Bhavna, you've been there for me through these difficult times, just to listen to me. And I know I could have picked up the phone and just complained and cribbed to you and felt much lighter. And I'm sure everybody who's joined this organization along the way feel the same. So thank you for being there. And I really appreciate the fact that despite not being a doctor, you realize the importance of how significant it is to support caregivers, so that even the patients are looked after better and there's a win-win for everybody. So thank you, and God bless you for all that you're doing, and more power to you.
Thank you for that, Rajam. I know that you have many personal stories, and those personal stories, your own experiences, and stories of people that you have interacted with, have led to many conversations and many things that we have decided to then solution for. So I truly appreciate the many ways in which you have supported the organization. Um, I would now finally like to invite Gaurav. Welcome.
Thank you.
And um, like I was saying, while Gaurav can professionally be introduced like someone who understands business, sales, and marketing and has been in the corporate world for many years, as far as the relationship with caregiver Saathi and me is concerned, I think he bears the brunt of my idiosyncrasies more than anybody else in the world. So I'd like to acknowledge you and thank you for your support. And would like to hear your side of the story.
I thank you. I might not be as cogent as the earlier speakers, but I'll try and blabber a few things. Uh, I think the first is to recognize, the passion which Bhavna brings to this venture. I think it germinated as an idea and was with her for many years. I think I've seen it being fueled. She's looking for additional support to bring it to fruition, and I'm so happy that she decided to go ahead, because knowing her, she is the person who would like to reach perfection before she kind of starts doing anything. And I'm so glad that she decided to put a hard stop and incubate this kind of a thought, which I would say it is a bit too early, or at the time when she started talking about it, there was no one or not many people thinking about it. What pandemic did was another story, but I think what I would like to say here is, I'll quote somebody. Bhavna was the lone person who started this mission. It was like, मैं अकेला ही चलता जाने मंजिल, लोग साथ आते गए और कारवां बनता गया. I think when you put your intention out there, and you have such a nice network of loving and caring colleagues, friends, you are able to build that amorphous idea into something, give it shape and bring it to a stage where it's still fluid, but it has fanned out, and it has a lot more directions. The other thing I would like to say is, I really admire the conviction, while she always has this waxing and waning about for profit and not for profit, but I really appreciate the conviction she has for the boundary conditions on how she wants to run this business or organization. And let me illustrate this for you. Coming from a product or a financial services business, I've always thought that the easiest way to get into the house was to provide, what is called the manpower or the help as a caregiver into the household. But she thinks about it a lot of times. She says maybe we will partner with someone, but that's not the space I want to be in. And she just holds her ground and sticks to the soft amorphous space, which is so very important. And one has realized it, like probably how Rajam has said or Roop has said. It is not about the socio-economic class, but this is something which was just bubbling within everyone, and just starting these conversations or incubating these conversations has surfaced this need. So I always maintain it is pretty much akin to category creation, and category creation is such a hard task, especially for people who pioneer. So I would like to say hats off to you and your entire team for being such passionate and committed people, and making, I think, impacting one person at a time and making this change, growing the ecosystem. It's not an easy task, especially when you're bootstrapped. Your time is the only thing which you can give. And I've seen you working 15, 16 hours uh, day in, day out at the cost of your health sometimes. But it's been a fantastic, I think, from the wayside, it's just been fantastic. I'm a lot more hopeful of the goodness around us. The way you guys pivoted during the pandemic, and nearly 700-800 people volunteering, uh, gives me hope for the future. And yep, all the best.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And it might be worthwhile to bring everybody who is here today together and open some questions to all of you and say that my team, many others who are watching this idea take shape, form, and you have kind of seen it or you have a vision. What is your hope or vision for Caregiver Saathi or the idea of something like Caregiver Saathi? Should I point to a person? Should we start with you, Naren?
Um, ask the question again, and I think I'll use the time to collect my thoughts.
Okay. Let me start with Roop then. Roop, would you like to articulate what you think is, should be, or can be the vision for Caregiver Saathi now that we have arrived where we have arrived?
Something that you said, Bhavna, a little while ago, I think this is something that makes me think and wonder. You talked about how caregivers very often in most families are women and girls, and the responsibility and the burden of caregiving falling squarely upon them keeps them from other opportunities in education, in professional work, etc., etc. And I think in feminism, very often, and the way feminist movements have talked about advancement of women, very often I felt that it's like um, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, for instance, while there has been a lot of pushing for women to go out there and become
Yes,
professionals and get into the organizational space, what feminism hasn't done is provoke people to rethink about the value of labor that were typically uh, ascribed for women, right? So with empowerment, the women of families took up professional work. So now caregiving has very often, whether it is for older people, the sick, the elderly, or children, has been relegated to hired help.
yes,
Yeah. So the entire notion of what is work and what is valuable work has really remained unchanged.
that's right.
Yeah. And it almost seems that the only way of respect and value of work can be earned is through monetization.
Exactly.
And I think this is very, very fundamental an issue that unless and until we really look at this piece, the intersection between caregiving and gender, I think and I can tell you what is my personally doesn't excite me, whether it is for Caregiver Saathi, and I'm sure, I mean, if that excites other stakeholders in Caregiver Saathi or any other organization, it's not that something that I have anything against it. But I think the risk of any organization runs into getting caught in becoming a service provider and getting into service delivery. So I understand when you say that you do not necessarily wish to step into the space of becoming problem solvers and therefore providing, getting into, into service delivery. And I think there's value in what you're thinking. So for me, that's the vision, that the discourse will change. It will provoke people and families to really rethink about how is this piece, because I don't think anybody has a solution to this.
Yes.
Yeah. The fact is that today caregivers or people who are into home labor very often feel indignified and taken for granted, is because the labor is not monetized. So the real question is, therefore, do we do is respect and value for labor without monetization even possible? And for me, that's the exciting question to explore.
Anybody who'd like to come in now?
Let me try and at least make a preliminary statement and see if I would like to add to it later. I think to me, through the work of Caregiver Saathi, I'd like to see caregiving become a very publicly understood, publicly owned up, and publicly discussed facet of everybody's life and existence. That it's no longer a private chore, just a duty within the bounds of the house, and something that everybody has to endure. And I think if we can shift the perspective from the current ways of looking at it, as I've just described, to something that is both valued, is acknowledged, and is seen as part and parcel of life at one level, but at the same time as something that uh, must be supported, and seeking support as something that is legitimate, necessary, desirable, and something that can be accommodated.
That's right.
Okay, I think so. That's one. I think the second thing I think is that caregiving and the role of the caregiver as something that must find sufficient understanding within work organizations and must have policies that accommodate this role that people play, and make the necessary adjustments in terms of work design, task design, and so on, in a way that makes it possible for caregivers to be able to juggle with their multiple demands at work and at home, become a little more bearable, and at least gives hope that it is possible. I think that's the other thing that I think I would like to see as part of what the Caregiver Saathi's work and mission would look at. I think the third thing that I'd like to see through the work of Caregiver Saathi is for this organization to be very widely held and supported, and in a sense, not just support in terms of best wishes, but also invested in, supported with resources, people, money, and so on. So that I think this organization doesn't get stuck with saying, "Oh, how do I, you know, fund the next year, or how do I find money to pay the salaries of the next month?" So, in some ways, a way that makes it possible for not just caregiver sati, but also for caregivers to be able to deal with their own resource crunches in a way that they don't have to sort of uh, they don't have to both bend backwards to not allow any time for themselves. Yeah, I know the preoccupation that Caregiver Saathi today has quite often in terms of both funding, in terms of saying how does one design the services in a way that it we don't just become another business organization kind of thing. So I think part of what I would wish to see is you know uh, a very persuasive argument to the public that makes it uh, incumbent on just about anybody to be able to step forward and support it. That's what comes to my mind at this point in time.
Thank you for saying that. I think one of the things that I sometimes find very difficult to explain is that, I'm very fond of Desmond Tutu's quote that at some point we have to stop pulling people out of the river and go upstream and figure out why they are falling in the river. So, uh, building the necessary infrastructure and getting it right in a preventive kind of a way is as important as saving people when they are in dire circumstances. And I wish that we can have supporters who can look at this initiative through that light.
I just add a couple of things. Just want to add. One, I think what you've started with, I think, is very valuable. That caregivers need care
Yes.
too, and I think it's as a very simple idea. But I
Yes.
think it just gets lost in this whole uh, understanding of or overlaying of the idea of duty, and familial expectations and around gender roles. That somewhere the caregivers deserve care, and it's okay to seek and ask for it. I think to me seems to be, to my mind, the core of what Caregiver Sati could do and must do and focus on.
If I can go next, Bhavna,
Yes.
I think this is something we have spoken about. We have all, I mean, obviously, your focus has been a lot on family caregivers.
Yes.
But coming from the profession that I am in, I really think we need to get a paradigm shift in the way professional caregivers
Yeah.
deal with patients and families. So, as a doctor, I know I've never been trained in communication. I've never been trained in soft skills. I really don't know how to handle the patient and the family which is next to them. We are so focused on cause, prescription, medication, side effects. We forget the fact that this is a human being and then that they have feelings and emotions, and that the family is really distraught at seeing their loved one so sick. So I think that is something I would really like to do with you, is to take the soft skills, the bedside manners, the way doctors should actually be talking to people and their caregivers. So how should professional caregivers be talking to family caregivers? And I know it's not the purview of a medical student to help the family caregivers, but at least direct them, use the appropriate body language, non-verbal, verbal clues to support the patient and the family, and acknowledge that yes, I can see you're in distress, let me help you, maybe you should do 1 2 3 4 5, and at least address it. It's not the purview of a medical student to handhold them. It is not possible for an 18-year-old to probably have the emotional bandwidth to do that, but at least let's train them to be compassionate, sensitive, empathetic doctors. I think that's something this country really needs, considering the fact that we are, definitely going to be an aging population. In the next 30 years, we'll have a lot of 60 and 80-year olds. Caregiving is going to be a challenge. Even caregiving at hospitals really needs to improve. It cannot be a transactional relationship. It has to be one which is, where you build with emotion, trust, and faith. So I think I would really like to go to medical colleges. We can start from the city of Bombay, where we go and talk to people, HODs of, you know government and municipal medical colleges. Only one of them has a humanities department, but
Yeah.
we should start that, so that even at the other end we kind of match up, not just supporting the public but also see to the doctors turn out to be a much better lot. And I know I have seen the difference in myself after I've trained myself in these things, and I realize what a awful doctor I was 5 or 7 years ago. So I think that insight needs to come. even doctors need to get empathetic and compassionate. It's really not about how busy you are. That change we need to see, and I really would like to take your expertise in that, uh, for seeing how we can make a difference.
Thank you, Rajam. I think that perspective and that point of view, that it is a complex problem for the simple reason that not only is the family caregiver invisible in general in society, is sometimes even invisible when they are really the people that the healthcare system rests on. Even then, they are invisible. So it is certainly a multi-pronged challenge. Over to you. Who would like to come in now, Mustafa or Gaurav?
Sure, I can go. Um, I think, as I think of Caregiver Saathi in the over the next 3 years, I can think of one primary agenda,
Mm-hmm.
and that is of uh, your purpose is clear. That's to work on caregivers and help caregivers, guide caregivers, support, train caregivers. Uh, if this can be a role of conscientizing India and the world, and that becomes the role in the mind, then I think it's a very large purpose served. In doing this, perhaps specialize and do one of the pieces of caregiving. The maybe you got some 20 different verticals in your mind that this arena covers. Pick up one or two, go deep, because that will establish your credibility as Caregiver Saathi organization. But the uh, purpose of the organization is not to become only excellent in these one or two verticals, but is to conscientize society in this entire arena of what caregiving is. And if you had started this, say, 5 years later, maybe that may not have been the need.
Mm-hmm.
You started at a time which is early on. You have I think created and crafted many of the definitions and understood the boundaries of what this is. So I think there's a great opportunity to bring in some form of conscientization around this purpose of caregiving. That's from me.
Gaurav talked about category creation, and I think that was, to my mind, a very significant piece of, because it entails a whole lot of things arising out of that kind of challenge, and I see that as a very central thing.
Yep. Thanks for that. uh, I think the complexity of the space where you have to connect multiple uh, dots, like Rajan was saying, the medical infrastructure, whether it's the social infrastructure, is the gendered roles, all of these things are somewhere connected, uh, and require fundamental changes for this to be recognized and accepted within the society. So I think, uh, in some ways, it is also kind of trying to reinterpret the healthcare system, because if you take away the stress at the nodes, then the already stressed healthcare system or doctors like Rajam won't go through this piece. Uh, I don't have a good answer on the purpose of the next 3 years, because I think, again, going back to this whole part of category creation, raising consciousness is will remain a key objective as you
Yeah.
move ahead. So you can't let go of doing this task of involving a lot more people, having a lot more conversations, because sometimes the unsaid things, people resonate with it or relate with it when somebody else expresses it. And like in financial services, I've seen on wealth creation, you tend to overestimate the short term, what you can do, and underestimate the long term. I think all these bits of efforts are adding to something big. What the final outcome or the shape of this would be, I don't know. But I think as long as you keep at this task of what you hold dear, what you've already identified, I think we're in a good place to go. Uh, I think there is a reality around how do you sustain it, and I think that's what a lot of you were talking about. How do you tug at the heartstrings to get people to open their purse strings in some ways? That's a
That's right.
task I think where one has to. And here I would just like to say, like, part of it has to do with knowing Bhavna. In her mind, being original is so important that she won't really go on the path unless until it is absolutely the first time in the world, and no one else has done it. And to me, while there is a fine balance, but I think being authentic is more important than being original. And as long as they can stay the course on just who they are and hold that dear, I think there's enough and more space and market for many players to coexist, and you don't have to be the only one. As long as they figure out, and they have a beautiful bunch of people. Unfortunately, except for the advisor group, most of them are women again, sadly. Uh, what makes them stand out, or why would people choose them? I think if they just focus on these things and build it into the DNA, and you all are experts at building what you called as the purpose or ethos or culture. I think that is what will create the distance in minds of people, is my two bits around this.
Well, thank you for that, and I do think that the conversation did take a certain serious tone. And thank you for bringing in the element of my reality, the thing that kind of keeps the tension alive in our home. That said, I would like to ask each one of you to share with us a special memory or an anecdote or something that must have made you smile or smirk or get frustrated with me, perhaps. I don't know. Anything that you would like to remember and share?
I only want to say the latest one, which is what I have told you to keep up our spirits alive, is the new song which sent it to you on the Coke Studio season 14. I think that
Yes.
should be our mantra to keep chugging along, which is to Jhoom. And I think despite all that comes, we have nothing in our control. Let's Jhoom ahead.
That is true. And I wish your throat was better and you would sing in your lovely voice and sing that song. So, thank you
Another
for,
time for sure.
yeah, thank you for zooming with
Gives
me.
us a reason to meet.
Yeah, well, you have zoomed along with me over the last few years. So, thank you for zooming.
Is this a reason we are doing this on restreaming and not on
Correct.
Zoom? We couldn't pronounce it correctly, so
Also, we have zoomed a lot, so that's why we have now changed the platform to.
Yes. So, now we are restreaming.
Uh,
So,
let me let me just add to what Rajan was saying. Three, four things come to mind, and I'm not in terms of events, incidents so much, as much as the experience of you over the many times that we have engaged. I think one of course, I know the boundless energy, but it also brought to me concerns about how much self care do you exercise. I think I've brought this up in conversations with you as well. Because you can't be everywhere. I know you're leading an effort, you're leading something quite pioneering, all of that. And you're out there for long hours, I know. And if our calls are any indication, like long, intense engagement. So I've often been concerned about not just your boundless energy, but also, how you renew yourself and, how much self care do you allow yourself. So that is one. The second thing that I've been very struck by is that I've seldom seen you hesitate to seek help, and I think that's both. I often taken that as an invitation to join in whatever it is that's either bothering you, or whatever it is that's exciting you, whatever it is that you're exploring. And I think there's been a certain quality of humility in saying, I don't know, I'd like to hear, what do you think, and so on. I think so. And the third that leads up from there, I think to my mind, is that you've attempted, I think, in almost every occasion to see how you can create a very inclusive uh, organization where everybody is sort of not just consulted, but also feels deeply a part of the system, and has a stake in its both in its vision and in terms of whatever markers of success that you define. So I think these three struck out to me very well. The incident that has stayed on, I think, which in some ways I regret, I suppose, is your whole interest in writing, and one long piece that you did around caregiving. And I think I used the sharp pencil a little too freely, and I don't know what happened to that paper since. and that, and I said, hey, so maybe I should be a little more careful in and
Kind, I think
discreet, I
kind,
suppose. And
not
kind,
careful.
yeah,
Kind.
kind is the word. Yeah, kind. Yeah, I thought I was exercising my brand of kindness, Mustafa, but it didn't work too well.
But look at
So,
me. But look at me. The two people that I sent that article to was you and Roop, and that was the end of it. But
so
it
yeah. So that's what I just wanted to say. That I think you have never hesitated to seek out help, resources, counsel, or just somebody to just listen to you. And I think all that one has done, I think from my side at least, is to just be there, listen to you, sometimes help you to listen to yourself. And, I realized that, I'm perhaps an instigator of thought and reflection, and certainly not an inspiration for action. So I'm just being true to my script, I guess, in a way. And deal with whatever disturbance you bring to a call and see if there can be some settlement at the end of it. That's it.
It's just so true. I think I do reach out to you, and I have these complex ideas that are muddled in my head, and I am ever so grateful to have a very safe space in which I can fumble and muddle, and I think come out. I don't need the action. I need what you have to offer. So thank you for that. Who's next?
No anecdote. I mean, I have multiple anecdotes, but I would just like to echo what Narendra is saying. And I think from a close quarters, I have observed, since it's going to be a long, long, long haul, I think you have to necessarily be a little bit more conscious of renewing and taking care of yourself and your team, and not be caught up in just being restless about the short term. So I think that I must say, I've seen tons and tons of instances and incidences where the work you do has impacted individuals in so many good ways that I think carry on. That's all.
Rope, you need to unmute yourself. I can't hear you yet. Hmm.
All right, so let me go while Roop tries to
Okay.
get his sound back on. Uh, यार भावना तुम गिव अप ही नहीं करती हो. You don't give up, yeah. That's it's a wonderful thing. I mean, in spite of many of the challenges that many of us may pose to you in phone conversations, or say why you're doing this, etc., etc., you don't give up, and that's wonderful. And this reminds me of something that a senior of mine told me when I joined an NGO called Pradhan. I remember. we used to be working for 16, 18 hours a day. I was staying in a small village. And at one of the meetings, I think 2 years after I had gone there, he called me aside and he said, Mustafa, remember, this is not a 100-meter race. This is
Mm.
a marathon. Are you ready to acknowledge that it's a marathon? And I think that I still remember the that particular conversation. It happened 30 years back, but it was a very important piece of conversation for me to re-look at what I was doing and how I was doing it. So you have the one big thing that a marathoner needs, which is not giving up, which is wonderful.
Thank you. Roop, are you back? No.
Roop, do a mime.
Sign language. Okay. We'll just see. So I hope that Roop comes back and hi Roop. Hello. I don't know what's going on.
Roop, you might see there are two icons at the bottom of the window. I just noticed them. I know they were there a long time, but that of a mic and see. Uh, no, I hadn't noticed it earlier. So just when Roop went silent, I was wondering what to do, and I noticed it. So just pointing it out to him.
Can you see the mute mic or press M? Okay.
Or UN.
Okay. Okay.
I just had one other thing to say after you heard Ruth.
Please go ahead. We'll just help Roop get back.
I think the what I wanted to say is I think that Caregiver Saathi has its own raison d'etre, it's got its own place. It's an idea, which will take time for acceptance and for its much wider appeal. But its time will come, and I think it's be very. I would just a note of caution from my side perhaps would be that we don't get caught with comparisons, looking at it as just another startup in a race with other startups. I think that will be your undoing, I suspect. Because I think to judge yourself on the basis of metrics, the typical startups, are prone to sort of measure themselves by, simply because, there's one round of funding and another round of funding and so on. I think uh, would I think set you off on a path which I think would perhaps not be helpful to you personally and perhaps to Caregiver Saathi. And I don't know if I have an answer to how you will then find your sources of funds to sustain. But nevertheless, comparisons are odious in this case, and I think it will not help you. That's been my understanding, and I leave it to you to do what you wish to do with
Clearly,
it.
Gaurav is
if I
moving.
if I
Can
say
you
this,
hear me now?
I get beaten up.
Yes.
Yes, we hear you. I just wanted to say if I say this, I get beaten up. So I'm so happy that you're saying some of these things.
I could see that, and I think all of you have borne the brunt of my feeling inadequate and comparing, feeling that we are not doing enough. Constantly being reminded that I'm comparing apples to oranges. Um,
Roop is back, so let's hear him.
No, I just think since everybody's concerned about Bhavna's inability to take care of yourself, Bhavna,
yes.
I think you can delegate taking care of you to others, starting with Gaurav and the rest of us. But the other thing is that I also think you're very resistant to receiving care.
That is
You
true.
want care in a particular way and the way you want it.
That is true.
And you
She
might
she
want to do
hasn't sent you that four bullet pointed letter. How I wish to receive care, Roop.
What to do when Bhavna calls you?
Correct. Correct.
Well, that brings me to the third thing because the earlier thing was Bhavna would call up and I would pick up the phone and I would say, "Ha, bolo," meaning that I know you've called up with some question, etc. So she gave me this big thing in terms of how I'm so purposive that it doesn't start with a "Hi, how are you?" So we tried that for a while, and for the next year, I think the "Hi, how are you?" questions never ended up, addressing the reason she called me up. So it just tells me that there is a need for you to sort of get into the "how are you" zone, and maybe some conversations like this, and we don't need to wait for another 3 years for Caregiver Sathi's birthday. And
Yes.
you need to have a high "how are you" zone conversations more regularly with your board and your advisors and your friends and your colleagues. Also, very keen to know who are the rest of the people behind the scenes who's doing this wonderful job.
So I now have a team, and I have to say that the passionate team that Gaurav was referring to, we have a very passionate, energetic, and well intentioned team of women. 100% women, not designed to be 100% women, but interestingly, we are. So there is Nabya, there is Gayatri, there is Ria, Dishari, Vimala, and now Meenakshi, who are handling various aspects of the organization. They come with some incredible experience. But what moves me and what I think, thank you for asking for their names, Roop, because I do think they deserve acknowledgement. For the 3 year celebrations, I think the team has put together an incredible lineup of events. And all the work that you see on our social media, everything that is coming up has been put together. I got to know very late. I didn't even know. Yesterday, all of them were up at 6 a.m. sorting out stuff without letting me know. So I got to know only later, and it gives me goose flesh that, to have such an involved team, I am truly blessed.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. That's wonderful
Fantastic.
that it is so.
Yes. It doesn't feel alone. I mean, it never felt alone with all of you that I could individually call. And now that we are here together, but with this team working full time, the way that they do and the way that they surprise me is very, very gratifying.
So, what are you saying about all the male applicants for this work, Bhavna? Are you saying that men haven't quite made the mark, or the right men haven't reached out to you?
They
Well,
don't get up at six, Roop. Men don't get up at six.
that is also that is the core reason. Men, it is an ambiguous terrain, and I do think there are many reasons. One, of course, the right men haven't yet applied for jobs. I also think that maybe not too many men relate with the idea. And I do think that men are, most of the men applicants that we had are under the pressure of the provider role. So, just like unpaid care impacts women, being a financial provider hurts and impacts men. So, their consideration very often is the salaries that we can offer. And we are not in a position to offer great compensation at this point in time. So, a large number of men don't apply, or also the ones that apply don't get selected. So, I'm hoping that we will have some. I do have an intern these days, the singular man in the team right now, doing a very good job. But I hope that there will be many more. As we shift the balance of caregiving in our homes and our workplaces, we will be able to shift the balance uh, in Caregiver Saathi as well. I would like to open the floor for closing remarks. Thank you for your time today. Rajam, would you like to go?
No, no, I just want to say I would love to see you grow and be with you through that journey. And like I said, it's been lovely to meet the rest of the ones who've been advising you. And I now know you are where you are because of all these men also in the advisory board. So lovely to meet all of you. uh, and hope to see you all in person sometime. Maybe Bhavna can host us to a nice Panju meal at her house, and I'm looking forward for that invite and meeting all of you personally.
Thank you, Rajam. Would you like would you like to go next, Roop?
If I'm heard.
Your voice is now heard.
No, I think this is a very nice conversation. And I think the way you've chosen to celebrate Caregiver Saathi and the 3 years of there, I think it's very nice. I think you're a great resource mapper, putting people together, reaching out, like everybody has said, and which I think is really very wonderful because for most non-profit organizations, I see uh, very well, let's put it this way, very few non-profit organizations, I think, are able to reach out and seek help, which is not necessarily financial or in a structural role. Most non-profit boards I have seen are almost sort of show of paper. So I think that's a wonderful thing because this journey cannot be solitary, and you will need all the support you get.
Thank you.
Okay. Let
Yes,
me
Naveen.
just say, first of all, congratulations
Thank you.
on having sort of covered this initial ground, navigated it, and so on, and great going. So that's one. Second, of course, is I'd just like to say all the very best. It's a long haul. And somebody talked about it as a marathon and not a sprint.
Yes.
And so I think all power to you, all strength to you, all energy to you. Third, I'd just like to also give a shout out to all the men and women who have appeared in your shows, caregivers who have taken the time and have been willing to speak of their own experience. And I think that's not an easy thing to do, I suspect. And I think hats off to them for having been willing to appear, to share, and to have this conversation with your hosts, uh, you know, over the last year or two. Wonderful. And I hope to see and hear more people talk about their journeys, just as we will also be tracking Caregiver Saathi's journey. So all the very best to you. And goes without saying, my time is available whenever you knock.
So grateful. Yes, Naveen.
I have nothing more to add except to say same same.
Yes.
No, sir.
Thank you.
I think I would like to thank all of you you know, on my behalf as well as Bhavna's behalf. A lot of times we end up getting into a face-off on some of these issues, and I think this team is let out and discussed very well with you. But I must compliment her and her passionate team for, I think, just showing up for work every day. It takes a lot, especially in this sector. And like Naren said, when you start getting into ODS comparisons with other startups or other pieces, you tend to get distracted. So just more power to you guys for showing up every day and continuing this journey. I'm with you.
So she chooses people well, right, Gaurav?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
Good
certainly.
luck. Much
I
love.
think that change, I must confess, has happened over the last 7 8 years. She was very self-driven, and me myself. I think this whole process work, in some ways, while I was skeptical initially, has kind of helped her discover herself and also look for these complementing skill sets. And she is a different person on a big journey. So yeah.
I was also trying to compliment you, Gaurav.
Oh,
I,
oh.
I thought so. I thought that was the message.
Well,
Well, at that time, she hadn't done her process work, and she didn't have the benefit of her mentors.
Yeah, that's a sad story for another day. So we should forget about it.
Well, on that note, I would have to thank you. And I feel a certain pride in saying that we are a significant community and hoping to reach out to many, many more. So, on behalf of the team, people, the interns, 1,500 and plus counting volunteers, 72 interns, more than 33,000 in our community, grateful to each one of you for your contributions, love, affection, support during our time thus far. This celebration, by the way, is one of my ways of taking care of myself and saying that it is important for us to celebrate how far we have come. Thank you for
No,
starting that.
for you and your, I think, team, I think great work behind the scenes. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you. Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Good luck.
Thanks, Bhavna.
Ciao. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
see you. Yeah.